So let's talk about casting a long line in deep water. And I've been dinking around all winter wearing my muck boots, not wading deep. So like, my deep water casting sucks. I will say this, for casting in deeper waters, it is really helpful to have a real good command of your bottom hand, because when you get in the deep water, you discover that suddenly the rod's shorter, the line's longer, you just don't have much to work with. But what helps me, of course, I don't try to make a world record cast, but what I do is try to keep the same form that I use with regular casting, but I try to use my bottom hand more, because when you get out in super deep water, that bottom hand can really come in handy for the sweep, of course, because your top hand, you know, that line suddenly is super long and you have to use leverage to your advantage. You can't make it up with the top hand. You've got to really make sure you're pushing and bending the rod using your bottom hand. So what I end up doing is I'll lift and then I'll sweep around and push with that bottom hand, even to the point where I'm lifting and then setting the anchor with the bottom hand. And yes, you can set the anchor with the bottom hand if you sweep first and then come up. This is just stuff I do. It may be right, it may be wrong, but I'm thinking it might help you, and it helps me. So there's at least one person who does that. So now I know this isn't real deep water for some of you guys, but for me, I'm going to keep my hands up high, lift, rotate, push, cast, okay? So again, for the single spey, I'm going to really use my body rotation and then my bottom hand to push. Lift, rotate, push, lift, and cast, okay? So, with a snake roll, it's not huge for me to cast in deep water because I blow my anchor so much. Casting in deeper water can sometimes help me. So, lift, cast. Make sure on the snake roll you get a nice high lift, get as much of that line out of the water as you can. You're in deep water, so it's going to be a little tougher. And then make sure that when that top hand goes towards the target, that bottom hand is pulling. And then make sure when you sweep, that bottom hand is really pushing. Just make sure you're pulling and then pushing out for the sweep and then pulling, and just not trying to muscle it. You got to get a light anchor. Light anchor is really important because you're not going to have the leverage really to pry it out of the water like you could in shallow water. So make sure to use that bottom hand in your snake roll. Lift, cast. Okay, I just cast. It actually helps me to cast in deep water. So the main thing, so what I'd say for longer, so for casting in deep waters, you can still have your hands in the box and have it be up here if that helps you. See, just don't do that. You can be like, right? So I'd say use your bottom hand. That's huge. I would say get your hands up high after the sweep, okay? Lift, sweep, and then cast that way if you have to. You can always backfill to a lower key position if that messes you up, okay? Really practice a lot in deep water. Don't try to cast as far. Just try to get a nice, crisp, tight cast. And really, what really will help you is to learn how to stop the rod high, because your rod's gonna come unbent pretty high anyway, right? So I like to stop it nice and high. The other thing about deep water is, so we're sweeping, drifting high. Try not to rear back and lay your line on the water. Don't sweep, lift, and do that. Sweep and then drift up and poke a hole in the sky if you have to, and get a feel for it, and then gradually you can, instead of sweeping and poking a hole in the sky and casting, you can gradually sweep, poke a hole in the sky at a little more of a rod angle, and then cast with it. Do a high stop if you can. Not because a high stop necessarily always catapults it, which sometimes it does. Sometimes it's a very powerful tool, but because it just helps me. That has helped me as much as anything with my casting, to just cast off the tip and cast high and make sure the bottom hand is doing the work. And don't do drugs. I would also say it helps me when I lift a little higher. My initial lift, if I lift a little higher on the single spey, I might have to come down and flat and back up a little bit. Nothing crazy though, you got to do it real gradually. But if I get a high enough lift to where I don't have to pry the line off the water, it just comes off, then I can use mostly my bottom hand and body rotation. The line comes off during the sweep. After the lift, the line just pops off real nice and easy, and then I'm not trying to muscle it back. So a higher lift and just floating my anchor into place with that high lift in it. I wish it didn't have to be so, but with a low lift, I can get a flatter anchor, better placement. Okay, the problem is though, I do better with these longer lines if I lift higher and float the anchor in, like just lift, sweep, and have to wait, okay? Continuous motion, constant tension, notwithstanding. I do best with these long lines, and I think you should be able to cast them either way, really. If I have a high lift, I lift high, rotate. I get a lot less blown anchors, less over rotation. So I don't want to lift ridiculously high, just a little higher. Like that. So I can watch that anchor float in. It just helps me. It does something for me. Doesn't blow anchors. Doesn't over rotate. I lift, sweep, kind of stop, and then get in the firing position in a relaxed, mellow manner, and that helps me.
Wow.